Well, the fourth indictment of the former president, historic for a pretty long list of reasons, including the possibility that will be the only case against Mr. Trump to be televised.
On Monday, the country watched for the first time as the indictment against a former president of the United States was handed up by a grand jury. Unlike in federal courts, Georgia typically allows cameras in the courtroom. The media can make the request, but there are some restrictions on what can be shown, like jury members, for example. Karen Morrison, associate professor of law at the Center for Access to Justice at Georgia State University, joins us live this morning to discuss the media access in this case. And from my understanding, thank you for joining us, by the way, it's up to the judge to essentially decide if cameras will be allowed in the courtroom. What are the criteria that this judge will be looking at to make that determination? Is it strictly, okay, what do we, the people, deserve to see what goes on behind closed doors? Is it, something that is a political, we need to see it kind of thing, or what's the threshold?
Okay, so the general principle is that courtrooms are supposed to not be behind closed doors. They're supposed to be open. It's an important sort of constitutional, the information. It's like a First Amendment right of the public to understand the operation of government. So that's a foundational principle. So that means that if it were a regular case and you wanted to see what was going on, you should have the right. Any normal citizen has the right to walk into any trial, typically. The only times when that is overcome, so there's a presumption for openness. The only time when that is overcome is if there's, say, serious concerns about safety for witnesses, or some kind of overriding reason why the public should be kept out. There's none of that here in terms of whether the court should be open to the public. The additional question, I think, here you're saying is, should it be televised? And Georgia's view so far has been that television, or at least streaming services or what have you, is an important part of open access to the courts, because not everybody lives in Atlanta, and first of all, there's a limited amount of space in the courtroom. And therefore, in order for the public to really watch government in operation, and the justice system is a branch of government, they need to have access to it. Okay, so let me stop there, and then you can...
That's right, and I get that. And listen, and you're seeing a push on the federal level as well with the Jack Smith special counsel 1-6 case. There's a push by media groups to let cameras in there because it's an extraordinary case, and and people,
unprecedented.
People want to get their eyes on it. But here in Georgia, this is also interesting. I kind of want to get your thoughts on this in terms of the grand jury, which just obviously handed down this indictment. Under state law, meaning here in Georgia, the identities of the jurors are not secret. They're listed, in fact, on pages 9 of the 98-page indictment. The law, aimed at bringing transparency to criminal proceedings, doesn't even give judges the option to protect the privacy of jurors, even in a high-profile case like Trump's indictment that could expose them to intense scrutiny or even threats. Washington Post reporting today. So it would seem that based upon our philosophy when it comes to juror privacy and, let the sunlight in, by extension, cameras in the courtroom seems to be an extension of the same rationale.
I think that's right. I think that, so like I say, the federal Constitution idea of open access to the courts and understanding, the public sort of First Amendment right through the press to understand what's going on in the courts is an important value. And in Georgia, in addition, they have sort of a state tradition of really trying to be transparent, or particularly transparent, which is why I think the presumption under the Georgia's Rule 22, which is the rule which covers, recording and such in the courts, and which was updated in 2018 to include smartphone recordings. It's a very liberal rule, and the presumption would be that the judge would grant it unless there are serious reasons not to. And I think in this case, given the public interest in the case, given how, this is about as close as you get to a case about the fundamental functions of government. Should there be a peaceful transfer of power? How do, should elections really be based on the voters or on the will of an individual who does not want to let go. And to see whether the allegations against the president can be proven I think, is going to mean that the case will be televised.
There may be finally a televised trial in this country that rivals OJ back in the 90s.
As far as viewership.
Right.
Yeah.
Real quick.
It'll be our trial of the
real quick though,
century.
is there a downside, do you think, in terms of cameras sometimes bring out people's performative nature? And two, I mean, everyone's out there in the open in terms of security threats. In this case, does have some of that. Let's be clear.
Well, the recording in the courtroom is supposed to be limited to times when the judge is present, and it is not supposed to focus on the jury. The judge, I imagine, could issue a ruling that says you may televise the proceedings, the witnesses, the defendants and the prosecutions at their tables, the judge. You may not record any of the jurors. For example, they could do that. Your issue about the performative aspect it's true. It is a concern. I don't think that it helped in the O.J. Simpson case, and in terms of it becoming much longer than it needed to be, and it seemed to devolve into more of an entertainment thing than an actual criminal case. But that's a whole other thing. But I think here, really, the right of the public to see the operation of justice and to understand what the case is really about and what really happened, rather than simply hearing it from talking heads on news shows saying this is an outrage versus this is absolutely important. I think it is really critical to the future of our democracy, not to sound too dramatic.
No, I think it should be interesting to see what happens here. And again, Georgia very liberal when it comes to these kinds of issues, how things proceed. And look, a televised trial for a president whose main claim to fame was being a reality TV star before he was leader of the free world. It's fitting in some ways, but we'll see what the folks in the black robes decide to do. Karen Morrison, Associate Professor of Law at the Center for Access to Justice. Thanks so much for giving us some time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.